think in the contemporary period, it's even more important to look at the whole question of gender broadly. I mean, I'm not just saying women's rights, but gender broadly, because especially in India, but that's also true all over the world, that we are in a point where there is a hyper visibility of women, right? I mean, if in the 60s and the 70s, the problem was really of the absence of women, that women were not there, whether it was in disciplinary spaces or in public spaces, that women were not present. Invisibility of women was the problem. Then I think for our contemporary times, the problem is really the visibility, hyper visibility of certain kinds of women, which gives us a sense. So commonsensically, therefore, we think that the woman question is resolved because now women are everywhere, right? I mean, you have all of these role models of women doing whatever, from being astronauts to being whatever. But and therefore, it gives us a sense, a false sort of a sense that the question of women's rights is resolved. But that there is this hyper visibility in that sense hides many things. Now, one, it hides the continued invisibility of many women. Two, that it hides therefore the complexity of gender in our times, where we cannot understand the question of women or women's rights in isolation, that we have to look at the question of gender with respect to, in the context of race, in the context of class, in the context of caste, nations, and the ways in which the processes of knowledge making, institutions of knowledge building, all of these construct all these different hierarchies. So I think that in fact in our times it's even more sort of important to actually study the question of gender, let me put it like that. So actually in India we have a very long history and a very rich, I would say, history of feminist men, I would call them. I mean, starting from Mahatma Jyotirao Phule to Ambedkar, we have a long history of men articulating, fighting for, struggling for women's rights. I mean, Ambedkar, I would say, is, in that sense, a prime example. Someone who designs, who charts the Hindu Code Bill for equal rights of women within the Hindu family, and is willing to, goes as far as to resign from his post as law minister when the more conservative elements within the Indian Parliament don't really let that go ahead. So yeah, I mean, I think that there is a long history in that sense of and a very rich tradition of men fighting for women's rights in that sense within India. Yeah, so actually my doctoral work is on the women's movement in India. I'm especially looking at the period after the 1990s. And why the 1990s? Because often we think of the 70s and the 80s as the heyday of the women's movement, and there's this idea that after the 90s either there is no movement as we know it, there are the critiques of NGOization and so on, or then there is a celebration that the movement has now gone global. So what I'm trying to do is look at the movement after the 90s as it shapes up in the context of the city of Pune, to try and map what have been the new strategies, the new questions, and the new sites of resistance. To argue therefore that it's not really maybe an end of the movement, but a new phase of organizing, and what could be the lessons that we can learn from that.